Benvenuti dalla Adnkronos, io sono Giorgio Rutelli e oggi con me ci sono due ospiti molto speciali che arrivano dall'America e sono James Carafano, benvenuto, della Heritage Foundation, una delle figure più importanti della Heritage Foundation, che è un think tank americano, e abbiamo Paul McCarthy dell'IRI, l'International Republican Institute, un altro think tank molto importante con una proiezione internazionale. We're going to switch to English now because our guests have just arrived from the United States. They have been traveling also through the Balkans, and I'm going to ask them first what's their impression after Trump's inaugurations and Trump's first days in office. He has signed already many executive orders. He has given already the direction of his presidency, but a lot of it is still to be understood, especially by Europeans who are kind of waiting to see what's going to be the impact of his second presidency on European Union and Italy in particular.
Yeah, buongiorno. So, should I start? 'Cause I have this vivid image that defines the whole thing for me, and we had in America we had these very serious kind of race riots in 2020 following the death of this individual George Floyd that was arrested by the police, and they were all over the country, and they were protests in Washington that really were didn't really stop, and they smashed, because it's a typical downtown. It has lots of big plate glass windows, and they smashed them all, and they're all covered with plywood. And I remember I even went to President Trump's first term when he announced his re-election bid, which they did on the White House lawn. And then afterwards, we went out, there was a massive crowd riding. And after that, literally every time people were worried, the businesses would come out and they would plywood over everything beforehand. It looked like a war zone. Mm-hmm. Even on election eve in 2024, everybody plywooded up their stuff. Well, it was really interesting because I left town day before the inauguration. But what was really interesting is I was around downtown that weekend. Nobody plywooded anything, and that I think shows that the country's in a different place than it was. Mm-hmm. In 2016, Trump really has massed a massive political force in the United States, which is the majority of Americans, which wasn't true in 2016. And it's not, and I think people are much more pragmatic. It's not the Trump of 2016. I think that's the most important thing for people to realize. This is a very, very experienced leader. This is somebody who was president for 4 years, was in the game all the 4 years he was out, was tremendously well prepared on how to take over the presidency, which is why we've had this absolute tsunami of action on the first day, hiring people, orders, stop this, end that, all, I think, very predictable. But on the other hand, it's the same Donald Trump. And when I know people get so consumed in the rhetoric, and the answer is, you take the rhetoric seriously, but not always literally. Many times when Trump says things which they are intentionally provocative, they are intentionally out of the box. A lot of times it's, I want your attention. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean to dismiss it as rhetoric, but it means I'm serious. It doesn't necessarily, he literally means that is what I'm going to do. And I think that's my problem with Europe. So many, and I don't mean Europeans, because in general I find most Europeans tending more conservative these days and starting to look more like conservatives in America. But to be honest, among European elites, it's like they have this fixture in their head of the Trump of 2016 that was wild and crazy and they didn't understand, and they've never moved on from that. Is that fair, Paul?
No, absolutely. I agree with everything that Jim said. You really get the sense that, and what something Jim said, which is very important, is that Trump hasn't changed. The country has come to him. And maybe in 2016, Trump was ahead of the curve, and there were a lot of forces arrayed against him now. Many of those have now been defeated, and the country, the majority of the country, is behind him on issues like immigration, most of all. And I would say immigration number one. Also unleashing the economic
Which is a new thing for a presidential election, to have immigration so high in the minds of voters and in the political agenda. It was not like that. But it was like this, for instance, in Europe in the years from 2015, 2016, in the years in which Trump became president. That was the issue in Europe. It wasn't in the United States, but it is now. And so it's still there.
And you can see this in the executive orders. Also, the war against woke was a prime mover of Trump for many years, but also the electorate as well coming to him. It wasn't always like that, but Trump put woke on the map as a problem to be defeated, and he did just that. And on Europe, yeah.
So this is really interesting. So if you look at the list of things which maybe mainstream conservatives are always on their agenda, but really attracted this larger coalition. He made inroads in every demographic. The only demographic that Harris actually made gains in is very rich white people. But so what were the issues that kind of brought this massive coalition together? Immigration, energy. People want reliable, affordable,
cost of living.
Energy. I call it the good life, right? People want to be able to say, my children are going to be more successful than I am. I'm gonna be richer in a couple of years. I'm going to own a home. All the woke issues, but also what we call sometimes we call it lawfare. Or rule of law, or political warfare that's using the system to beat on your political enemies. Concerns about China. I mean, everybody agrees, but what do we do about that? What's really interesting? And definitely something that's definitely wasn't there last time: anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. This kind of explosive Jew hate that Americans are just appalled by. What's really interesting for me, traveling a lot, is when I go to Latin America and Europe, I often hear the same thing. And we all call ourselves different things: center-right, classical liberal, natcon, freecon, whatever. But it's amazing how many just everyday people in Europe and Latin America and the United States kind of have that same list of what they want in their lives. And I think Paul's exactly right. Trump put together a much, much broader coalition than he had in 2017. And people came to him not because of who he is, but because of what he promised to do. This is, the term populism. And when people use that, they normally mean it in a pejorative way, in kind of the 19th, 20th century way. Like, he's a populist. We elect this very popular, glitzy leader, and then we do exactly what he says. This is completely different. This is the people saying, we want leaders who are going to do what we want. It's very, very different.
You mentioned this populism idea, which, of course, Steve Bannon, for instance, has talked about populism in good terms. But he is now, kind of at odds with part of this coalition that you talk about. And this is quite interesting from the Italian and European point of view, because we have seen and we have thought of the Republican Party as a monolith for many years, and sometimes there was, of course, the neocon side of it. There was they had a doctrine that was thinking about exporting democracy, etc. But then, for the rest, we have seen a Republican Party that was more or less on the same page on many issues, and now we see a very diverse, not only Republican Party, because it's not only the party; it's a diverse base of people And now there's the contrast between Steve Bannon that says we should stick to the MAGA movement and the grassroots movement, and we should not let the tech oligarchs become so influent in this. And we see Elon Musk and Steve Bannon fighting on, for instance, on the fact about high-skilled workers' visas, for instance, and so how is Trump gonna work and try to keep these different souls together?
I don't know, Jim.
Yeah, no,
I answer for that. I mean, it's hard to keep a political coalition together. But I think this, and we were just talking about this as we were walking over. I think there's staying power in this coalition. One thing we didn't mention is that he brought ethnic minorities in, blacks and Hispanics and so forth, into the coalition for the first time.
Yeah.
It was the highest black vote for a Republican candidate since Richard Nixon in 1960.
Yeah, he even captured a lot of the Muslim vote. So, so I'm glad you brought up Steve Bannon, and I wanted Paul to talk first because IRI. This is their bread and butter, right? They go around the world and they work with these political parties to help strengthen the democratic institutions, and a lot of times that is they may have great ideas, but they don't understand the dynamics of politics of how do you get to a majority, and then when you have a majority, how do you service them and govern? So they're the real experts on that. So I think the magic of Donald Trump is there's two differences. One is the Republican unity of the Reagan era, which was kind of the first time Republicans really came to national prominence, was achieved by essentially bringing together three groups of voters which had never kind of coalesced before. Evangelical Christians, which were a rising political force, so those are kind of social conservatives, the national security conservatives, many of whom were like the neocons that you talked about, and fiscal conservatives, right? And that was called fusionism, and they all voted for the same people. And interestingly, Reagan actually brought in a lot of voters who weren't Republicans, right? Mm-hmm. That model began to break down in the 1990s for a couple of reasons. One is our political parties became less ideologically and geographically diverse. So in the old days, from the end of World War II up to the 1990s, you could look at a Republican Party and see liberals and conservatives, doves and hawks. You could look at a Democratic Party and see liberals, and so you could always get bipartisan because you could pull from both sides. So what happens in the 1990s is the two political parties begin to diverge, and today it's culminated in essentially the Republican Party is a conservative party, the Democratic Party is a liberal party. If you want to vote for conservative, you have to vote for Republicans. If you want to vote liberal, you have to vote for Democrats. And the old fusionism really doesn't work anymore because so many of these competencies really intertwine. How do you talk about security and not talk about the economy? How do you talk about whether you should have tariffs or not, and not talk about how that impacts on people's jobs? How do you talk about life issues and other issues? And so you can't unite the party by not talking about the things you disagree on. It's the opposite. You unite the party by focusing on the things you disagree on to get to something. And we're talking over here, for example, on the life issue, how there are different views across the movement. Trump came up with a position that everybody could live with, right? That was in the left and right guardrails. He just did it again on the visa issues on H-1B. And the magic to that is exactly how my good friend Steve Bannon gets it wrong. The future of conservatism is not by defining an orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. That's not going to work. You're never going to become a mass political party. And more importantly, you're never going to solve the issues that most people care about in governance that are going to bring the good life. And so it's about not defining an orthodoxy, but giving voice to people who feel like they haven't been heard. And so, for example, if you look at the Trump cabinet, it reflects the diversity of the conservative movement. It's the president's statement that everybody gets a voice at the table. And it's not diversity like Biden diversity. It's not, I want a man,
Yeah.
I want a woman. I want a man that looks like a woman. I want a woman that looks like a man. It's diversity in terms of the needs and wants of the American voter.
Okay, so let's go to Italy. You're here to participate in a very important event that's going to take place tomorrow. This event is organized by your two organizations, Fare Futuro, which is the think tank by Minister Urso, who is going to be there. Tajani, Minister of Foreign Affairs, is going to be there, and a lot of Italian members of parliament. So it's a very big event, also organized by the Atlantic Committee, the Italian Atlantic Committee. And so we go and we talk about Giorgia Meloni and Donald Trump and their relationship. And we know that Giorgia Meloni was the only European leader present at the inauguration. The European head of government. I mean, there were a lot of political leaders, and I found that as very interesting as well. This is a different time also in diplomacy and international relations, and I find a lot of commentators and analysts a little bit they have a difficult time because they are trying to apply old rules to a new playground, and Giorgia Meloni, it looks like she understood that there's new rules and she's not listening to the ones that says, but this is not protocol, this is unheard of, this is not part of the what has ever been done until now. So do you think that this is going to give a real advantage to Italy? Do you think that Italy is in a position of, advantage compared to other European countries? How is Italy going to use this advantage if it has?
Well, I'll let Paul talk a bit about the conference. And to be honest, IRI played a real leadership role in bringing this together and really doing it, I think, at exactly the right time. But I'll just say, look, and this is not hyperbole, I truly believe this. In future years, people are going to look back and they're going to talk about Meloni, Musk, Trump, and Modi the way people talked about Reagan, Thatcher, and John Paul. Mm-hmm. And they are the transformational leaders of their time. They're the leaders who have broken the code on how do you understanding what everyday voters really want, how do you build a coalition to get into power, and how do you deliver governance which actually delivers on the agenda that people want. That's the kind of common thing that unites all of them. Musk is not a religious leader like John Paul, but he's a brilliant thought leader, and much in the way John Paul was about. John Paul was what he brought to that relationship was he envisioned a new world, a free Poland, an Eastern Europe that wasn't in the Soviet bloc, a world where that things mattered, right? And Elon Musk, in his way, when he talks about space and human potential and the need to deal with the demographic crash we're seeing in many places of the world, he's playing that similar role. So I don't think this is just politics. Mm-hmm. I think this is the transformational leadership of this generation.
Absolutely. I think this is important. On the question, I'll talk a little bit about the event that we're having in the Italian Senate tomorrow. But on the question of Meloni's relationship with the new Trump administration, Trump 2, there's obviously a lot of potential. It is a special relationship. In fact, I think in many ways, the relationship between Washington and Rome has replaced the relationship between the historic relationship between Washington and London. And there's just a lot of things to be done. And what brings them together in thinking about what we were talking about earlier in this podcast was a flexible ideology is too big of a word, a flexible ideology, which includes conservative values particularly social conservative values, with combining that with something that the neocons believed in, which was America's strength on the world stage. And I think Meloni wants Italy to be strong, and she sees a partner in Washington and in Trump, and Malay the same way, to bring their countries back from a position of weakness. And that's the way Trump felt about the United States. His inaugural address was focused on the problems that he was going to fix for America to get it back to where it once was. And this is important. With regard to the event that we're having tomorrow, the transatlantic conversation is going to be incredibly important. There are a lot of issues on the Trump administration's agenda, many of them domestic policies. What we would like to emphasize with the work that we're doing together, IRI and Heritage, is the importance of the transatlantic cooperation and the place that Europe fills for America in the new administration.
Yeah, I mean, people kind of portray Trump as somehow a threat to the transatlantic community. I think that's completely wrong. Trump has way more friends in Europe than he had in 2016. You know, we talk about Meloni the most because I think her vision for a future society that is free, safe, and secure most closely aligns with Trump. But there are so many leaders in Europe that not because of geopolitics, but just because of feeling the trust and confidence to share together. Orban, Meloni, Abascal in Spain, Geert Wilders, Liz Truss, Nigel Farage, Duda in Poland. And what's interesting about all those people, they don't all agree on everything. Right?
Yeah,
but
I was talking about a colleague about this with a colleague of mine, and what would have not happened maybe a few years back was this international. Actually, Bannon tried to create something like that at the time. It did not succeed because these leaders were wary of American, and especially they were really, they were attached to older maybe ways of doing politics, even in their own countries. And so they said, we don't want to show to our voters that we are so close to the U.S., that we are not, sovereignistic in a way that was the way that was depicted in the 2010s. But now I see this opening up, this relationship also with leaders that you would not have think, except for Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen is the only outlier here because she keeps her position, I think, of mistrust regarding the United States.
To me, that is a wall that just loses a brick every day. I mean, she has, I think, really moved the party into, and I think in many ways, learning a lesson from Viktor Orban and Duda and some of the others is to have a strong relationship with Donald Trump and American conservatives. You don't have to agree on everything. But you have to be able to work together in trust and confidence. And on the issues you disagree on, you have to be able to be honest about the disagreements. So maybe she's not going to move to where American conservatives are on the life issue, but on so many issues, we can all sit in a room. I saw this in the United States. One of the things I did is
maybe that is more of a French thing than Marine Le Pen thing. I don't know.
No, I think that's changing too. I think the notion of kind of the French traditional view is changing. Look, we see this in Canada as well. I mean, Canada is about to elect a very conservative leader, and they're not electing him because he's like Donald Trump. They're electing him because that's the leader Canadians want, and they're not going to agree on everything, but there's a lot of alignment there. And Canada, for example, always was very kind of standoffish about its policy in the sense that it didn't want to cooperate with anybody in the Arctic. It was a sovereign issue. They didn't even like cooperating with us. That's completely changed. They look and they see the threat of Russia. They know they can't do that. They know they have to partner. I think the French get that too. The French have to partner. They just can't. Charles de Gaulle could be Charles de Gaulle for the simple reason that he was, 800 miles behind NATO's front line and nobody was attacking France. He could do whatever he damn well pleased. But today's France can't do that.
So we cannot not talk about Greenland, since you mentioned the Arctic, and the fact that this is something that came up many times when we spoke, the fact that we see Trump as an isolationist, somebody that as soon as he comes back to the White House, he's going to close the borders, only talk about internal issues, and that's it. And that never happens. It didn't happen the other time. It's not happening this time. So what I'm asking is, isn't there the risk that when Trump talks quite legitimately, for instance, about Panama, because it's definitely an issue that is of great concern for the United States. It's one of the main trade routes for the U.S. It's been absolutely taken by the Chinese. So this is quite a serious and not to be mocked issue. But even Greenland is a very serious issue. But isn't there the risk that if Trump says, okay, this is our quadrant, we're going to take care of our quadrant and expand our influence into these two different territories, then that's going to encourage Russia to say, well, okay, so my quadrant is in Central Europe, so I will keep on expanding in Ukraine or Georgia, etc. And then, of course, China with Taiwan. So we all divide up our world in three different influence zones, and then that's it. Or is this maybe going to be a message to them that the fact that the U.S. is still active on the international front and maybe can deter their actions? I don't know. I don't know how to read this.
It is a false analogy to equate what the Russians are doing in Ukraine and what China wants to do in Taiwan and U.S. policy. For the simple reason is the objectives and the means and methods are very different. The United States is not out to create hard spheres of influence. We are not recreating the Cold War. We're going to have one big red circle, and that's all our stuff, and the other guys are going to have a big blue circle. The world can't be divided that way. Trump is way so experienced that he knows that's not true. On the other hand, you cannot allow your legitimate national security interests to be compromised by people who are out to get you. There is a perfect analogy between European concern about Ukraine, not just Ukraine, but where Putin might go after that as directly threatening their security, as there is about Greenland. Greenland has only been vital to U.S. interests since World War I. So, and ironically, because you hear a lot of Europeans get very nervous about this, but why is Greenland important to us? It's because Europe's important to us. Because the transatlantic crossing is the lily pads that tie the transatlantic crossing together, which are literally non-negotiable, are Greenland and Iceland. It's always been that way. I mean, during World War II, if we'd lost Greenland and Iceland, we could not have won the Battle of the Atlantic. It was that way when the Cold War ended. It was that way in the 1990s. We never talked about it, and we never did much about it because we never saw a credible threat.
It was given for granted.
The way that we were doing well with China. And so, and the thing is, if you talk to the Canadians or Greenland or Panama, but they get it. I mean, I've talked to people in Panama. They get it. They get that the United States has a legitimate concern. Obviously, if China cuts the Panama Canal, that's equivalent to the Russians putting nuclear missiles in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's just not going to be tolerated. So the Panamanians know that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. I just talked to some of the folks from Greenland 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, or 4 days ago. I can't remember. I lost track of time. Friday. Anyway, they get it. Now, I mean, and again, I think this is a case where Trump's making the point that these issues need to be resolved just in the same way that we need to ensure that there is a free and independent Ukraine that can defend itself. We need to make sure that Greenland is free of the capacity of the Chinese to threaten the United States or Canada or the people in Greenland, and same in Panama. This is the reality.
I see a new Monroe Doctrine taking shape And there is a sphere of influence aspect to this. However, what's changed right now is Trump understands that the United States has to be strong in the world, not just in its sphere. So Ukraine is going to remain important. I'll just add, and thinking about Marco Rubio coming on as Secretary of State, given the fact that he's a Cuban American, we have to put Greenland and the Panama Canal in a broader context of America becoming a bit more forceful with regard to South America in particular, and the leftist dictators that are making deals with China. Chinese influence is increasing in South America rapidly, as it is in Panama. And we're going to see the new administration pushing back on people like Maduro, for example, like Ortega in Nicaragua, and Cuba, indeed, now. More pressure moving forward. And Marco Rubio fits very well into this new vision. But I agree with Jim that this doesn't mean that America is going to withdraw behind a wall, its quadrant, as you said. They're going to remain involved forward on Taiwan, forward on Ukraine moving forward.
So actually the better analogy is the free and open Indo-Pacific, the idea that Prime Minister Abe introduced for our partnership in the Indo-Pacific with India, Japan, and Australia working together.
So not the quadrant, but the quad.
The quad, right.
The quad rather than
Well, that's
the
exactly right.
quadrant.
Because the idea is, what's the purpose of this? It's to keep these spaces free and open, not to close people out. And I think people get the Monroe Doctrine wrong. The Monroe Doctrine was imposed by the United States to protect people from attacking the United States, right? To protect adversarial interests, who, by the way, were oppressing many people in Latin America and undermining and thwarting their own aspirations for national liberty and sovereignty. I would be the first to admit the United States did a lot of meddling in Latin America over the centuries, and we could question whether that was smart or not. But that was not the objective of the Monroe Doctrine. And the new Monroe Doctrine is not about the United States imposing a wall around the Western Hemisphere. The new Monroe Doctrine is the United States and like-minded countries in the Western Hemisphere partnering together to keep out malicious actions of people who are going to undermine our peace and prosperity. And they are the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. And honestly, if that's no different than, for example, what the Europeans want in the Middle East and in Africa. They would like these places to be free of malicious influence, which could be used as a base to essentially threaten and undermine them.
And remember, Trump's foreign policy is going to be America first. In other words, when looking at Latin America, he's going to be thinking of how this protects American national security interest. And we were talking earlier about how important immigration is right now. Having leaders like Maduro in Venezuela letting out their criminal element and other people to move north and come in illegally in the United States is very top of Trump's mind as well.
So what does America first mean for a country that has global interests and global responsibilities? Well, obviously, first it means being secure in your own backyard, that an adversarial power cannot create a vulnerability to threaten, even in our own country. For example, we have the Chinese buying vast amounts of land near U.S. military bases. I don't think that's a good idea. If the Russians wanted to, buy a big chunk of downtown Rome and put a base there, I don't think people would think that's such a good idea. We need a peaceful and prosperous and stable Western Europe, a peaceful and prosperous, stable Middle East, and a peaceful and prosperous and stable Indo-Pacific. All three of those are important. So America First comes with a lot of responsibility, and it's not it's not something that the United States can impose on the world. We never had that power, even at the height of we never had the power to just tell everybody what to do. But it's also something that the United States cannot achieve by walking away from parts of the world.
But I mean, we can definitely say that the Trump wind is blowing quite strong in Europe lately. Right. You can see, because it went through the Silicon Valley first, and we saw the realignment and the change of hearts of many Silicon Valley leaders. But now we're seeing something happening in Europe as well. There's a EPP declaration of a couple of days ago that basically said, let's stop all the Green Deal regulation for companies that are, stifling companies' growth, and they are choking basically their ability to operate in many cases, especially if you're a small and medium enterprise. So we are seeing definitely something that is shifting, and it's shifting quite fast. And we've seen this in financial markets. Right. We've seen this on DEI policies, on ESG policies. There is one big issue that it's still, a big red dot on Europe, and it's defense spending. And this might be my last question today. So do you see that this shift that is already happening on different domains finally happens as well on that part? Because, of course, we have Poland that is spending more than 5% of its GDP. We have the Baltics that have been spending, over 4%. But there's still Germany, Italy, Spain. There are countries in Europe that are way below the 2% threshold. And now, of course, Trump is talking about 5%. But in order to get at least to 3%, maybe.
Look. Thank you. That's a great question. And it gets to the single most important priority of this president's administration, which is to deliver prosperity for the American people. That's going to happen by unleashing energy with as much reliable, affordable, abundant energy, regulatory deregulation, a positive business environment. And Trump's answer to friends and allies is, dude, we're going to grow. We can grow with you or without you. But we're not slowing down for you. So, dude, lace up your sneakers and start running. And I think that's what we're seeing here. People raise, and even Trump says, well, we're going to impose all these tariffs. We're going to generate all this money. I got to be honest with you. I don't see us generating an amount of revenue through tariffs that is going to deliver the growth that America needs, right? So in the end, I think tariffs may be a great tool to get people to align their economies correctly, but tariffs, we're not going to tariff our way into prosperity. What has to happen is we need to link two issues together. Because if you want 5% GDP for defense, and this includes the United States, dude, you need a monster grow your economy, right? And so we need to be talking about those two things is, yeah, sure, great. We should all go to 5%. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is how we're going to open up our economies to deliver the level of growth and wealth that allows us to get to 5%. And I would argue it's the argument is not, well, we need growth so we can sustain the traditional welfare states and the things that we have that we all love that generate no value, but people like, right? I think we need the idea that we need a lot of money so we can afford to do the things that aren't very good for us, that needs to stop. But we have to have policies that deliver growth if we're going to get policies that deliver the kind of defense spending that I think we all recognize is probably responsible.
What's going to work in strengthening the transatlantic relationship is a more balanced relationship when it comes to numbers on NATO spending. Also, free trade is great, but fair trade is going to be emphasized between the United States and Europe. There's an imbalance. So the Trump administration is going to focus on these imbalances in the transatlantic relationship. Will it get to exactly where it wants to be? Probably not. I agree with Jim. Read The Art of the Deal. You go out big and you threaten your adversary so that you can come to a more middle position.
I hate the term fair, though. Because actually, traditionally, when people said free and fair trade meant all these kind of chains on trade that actually made it less efficient, less productive. Excessive labor regulations, excessive regulatory demands. That was their idea of fair. It's outcomes that matter. Trade needs to generate wealth if contributing to your economy. So quit telling me I have to be, a free trader, have no rules, or I have to trade, in a fair way. If trade's not actually delivering wealth to my country and economy, so I think we need a different set of verbiage. We need wealth creating trade. That's what we really need. And I got to say, I think Giorgia Meloni has been such a leader on this, because one of the things she's recognized is one of the key drivers in power of wealth is going to be these corridors, connecting with Africa, the Mediterranean Plan, 3 Cs initiative, IMEC. These are going to generate wealth, because that is how the world has been connected for millennium. We need to bring those pathways back, and that is going to generate wealth. I think Italy has really been a very visionary leader in thinking creatively about how do we really start to drive wealth creation in Europe, because Europe needs prosperity, absolutely 100%. And Trump knows that, and that's why a lot of this is, he wants you to be a better partner. He doesn't want to leave Europe. He wants Europe to stand up and do what's good for Europeans, because in the end, that's going to be good for America.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, James Carafano, Paul McCarthy, and thank you to our listeners, and vi diamo appuntamento ai prossimi incontri di dell'Adnkronos. Grazie.